Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, October 1st, day 726 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz, and military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, David. Hi, Amanda. Thank you both for taking the time on this very busy day.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
A 47-vessel flotilla attempting to break the maritime blockade on the Gaza Strip should arrive just in time for Yom Kippur. We'll hear what we know about Israel's plans for interception. We will continue our analysis of the Trump peace plan and learn about more reactions from the Palestinians as U.S. President Donald Trump appears to give the Hamas terror group 3 to 4 days to respond. All of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz, and military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, let's start with you. And the 47-boat Global Sumud Flotilla is set to reach the Strip this week, potentially even over the Jewish holy day, Yom Kippur, which starts tonight. It is carrying over 500 activists, including Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg, as well as parliamentarians and lawyers. The flotilla is being escorted by 1 Spanish and 2 Italian Navy vessels, and Italy, at least at recording time, has already announced that its ships will turn back before approaching the coast. Now, Manny, this is a much larger flotilla than any previous ones, as far as I'm aware. So what are you able to tell us about the IDF's plans for interception within the confines of the military censor, of course?
So this flotilla is definitely a much larger challenge for the Israeli Navy than the previous ones, which were, 1 boat. This time we're talking about 500 or so activists, at least according to the organizers, and 47 boats. So it's a different challenge, but the Navy is saying that they have prepared for the arrival of all these boats. And from what we understand is, in the past, the Navy, the naval commandos from Shayetet 13, the Flotilla 13, they've boarded the vessels and then towed the vessel to the shore, because we're talking about nearly 50 boats. From what I understand is, at least this is the current assessment, or at least the plan, but it's unclear if this is going to happen, is that the Navy will board the boats to detain the activists and then take them to one larger Navy vessel or multiple larger Navy ships, and bring them all to the Ashdod port to then be, or the Ashkelon marina, depends where they decide to take them to, but bring them to Israel's shores and then deport them from the country. And then instead of towing all of the 50 vessels, the Navy might in fact actually sink some of them at sea, because it's quite a lot of work to try and tow 50 vessels. I'm not sure they even have the capability to do that, but it really depends on what the situation is. Right now, at least, as of recording, the organizers say they've passed the sort of point where the previous flotillas were stopped. They've reached the 150 nautical mile limit, where the previous ships were seized. And we did see overnight footage published by the activists of a Navy patrol boat passing by these vessels and then leaving. So nothing happened overnight, but it's possible that tonight, when Yom Kippur already has already begun, that's when the Navy will try and stop them. But that's at least the plan for now, from what I'm hearing from military sources. But again, things could change, and Israel at least hopes that the activists won't reach that point, and the activists will actually listen and turn back or go to Cyprus or to another country to drop off the aid there and then bring it in through the organized routes.
How many soldiers, naval men, I'm not sure what you would call them, would be required to pull off this operation, in your estimation?
Sailors would be the right term. It's hard to say. I mean, the Israeli Navy is not huge. It's one of the major wings of the military, but it's not that big. The Navy only has, I think, several dozen of these patrol boats, maybe even less than that, in total, and in southern Gaza, in the the 916th Patrol Squadron, which is responsible for that area. They only have a few dozen of these boats. So it's to try and deal with 50 of these vessels, it's going to be quite a bit of a challenge. So to deal with 500 activists as well. We're also hearing reports that police have called up, or at least designated some 600 officers to try and deal with the detaining the activists as they reach the shore. I also saw something that the health ministry had also instructed hospitals to be prepared for potentially, activists being, injured, or maybe they're just, they've been at sea for a long time. Some of them might need medical treatment. So hospitals were also ordered to be prepared for dealing with, hundreds of these activists. The prison service also needs to be ready, because those who refuse to be deported immediately, they will be jailed and then be brought in front of a court and then eventually deported regardless. So it's definitely, it's not just the Navy that needs to prepare for this. There's also other security bodies in Israel and medical officials that all need to prepare for this. Quite a big event that may happen tonight.
Tonight, which is, again, of course, arguably the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. So let's continue. And on Tuesday, Israel's foreign ministry said that Hamas documents recovered by Israeli troops in Gaza allegedly revealed the terror group's, quote, direct involvement in the flotilla. And in a statement, the ministry claimed that the documents, quote, show a direct link between the flotilla leaders and the Hamas terrorist organization. And they're pointing to especially the group's foreign arm, which is the Palestinian Conference for Palestinians, or PCPA. What are you able to tell us about this PCPA, Manny? So
PCPA is not, I would say, secretive about its ties to the flotilla. One of the sort of top members of PCPA in the United Kingdom, Zahir Birawi, he's the head of the PCPA sort of unit in the UK. He's known for organizing these activist flotillas in the past. He was one of the spokesmen for the Mavi Marmara flotilla in 2010. Online, he is described as the chairman of the International Committee to Break the Siege. It's an organization that's behind these flotillas, and also he's a founding member of the International Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which again is behind this movement. Now, Israel accuses PCPA of being an arm of Hamas, and it was even designated several years ago as a terror group by Israel because of it being tied to Hamas. And according to Israel, PCPA is essentially the foreign arm of Hamas. It acts as sort of a de facto embassy for Hamas abroad. And they published one document, which was a letter from then Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh, which essentially endorsed PCPA and sort of recognized it as something part of Hamas in some sort of way. And then another document that the ministry published, which was seized in Gaza recently, lists Birawi, the head of the PCPA in the UK, as a member of this organization. And this document was found in a Hamas outpost in the Gaza Strip. The second accusation made by the ministry, which they didn't prove documentation for, is, they did. Well, I'll explain. The list also has someone called Saif Abu Kashak listed on there as a PCPA member in Spain. And according to Israel, I didn't see proof of this, but they say that he's also a CEO of this company in Spain that owns dozens of ships that are the ships participating in the flotilla. And essentially, the accusation is that the ships that are being used in this flotilla are actually owned by Hamas because of this. Them being owned by this company whose CEO is a member of the PCPA. So that's the claims here. It's, I don't think that all of these activists there are Hamas members, but there's definitely involvement by Hamas. There's definitely support by Hamas for this flotilla. It's something that's beneficial to Hamas to break Israel's siege on the Strip, which it has imposed, of course, since 2007 at least, and Egypt as well has imposed a siege on Gaza since then as well. There are ties to Hamas or involvement there, but of course we're talking about 500 activists. Many of them are just pro-Palestinian activists, anti-Israel activists who are involved in this. Their specific ties to Hamas are not clear, but there is definitely involvement here.
Manny, thank you so much for all of these updates today, and I'll say shalom to you right now.
Thank you.
We'll go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz. This morning, a senior Hamas official told the BBC that the terror group will likely reject U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to end the Gaza war, telling the British network that it serves Israel's interests and ignores those of the Palestinian people. The objections that they raise to specific points come as no surprise to anyone who has read the plan, and we'll go over their objections. But whether or not Hamas will join the peace plan, I think, is a lot less clear. Although we must remind our listeners that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist group, which also holds several hostages, has already dismissed the peace plan out of hand. So, David, let's talk about, we can't exactly predict whether Hamas will or will not join the peace plan, but let's talk about their points of objection to begin with.
Well, I think all logic would appear to dictate that they would reject this. Specifically, it requires them to give up their key piece of leverage, sorry that we have to talk in those terms, which is the hostages, dead and alive, within 72 hours of the deal being agreed. At which point they have no other leverage over Israel. And when, as they inevitably would, they would breach any other terms of this deal or a ceasefire, Israel would have no compunction about striking at targets and tackling them. The package does not provide a timetable, a clear timetable for an Israeli withdrawal. It does not, it is designed essentially to ensure Hamas's demise, not merely to deprive them of the hostages, but also to require them to disarm, provide for those who want to go into exile to do so, gives them no role in a post-war Gaza, no governance role, no military capabilities, and it does not even provide a clear timeline for the end of the war. Their conditioning, they were always saying, we're prepared to release all the hostages once the war ends, with guarantees for the war to end, and so on. None of this is there. It does not provide any wiggle room for them in theory. So then the question is, why on earth would they accept it? Not why on earth would they reject it, right? And why on earth would they accept it? Potentially, perhaps because they believe they would be able to wriggle out of it, even after they've released many of the hostages. They will somehow be able to survive. They will fade away into Gaza, ready to return as soon as they're able to. They will quietly rearm. They will quietly recruit. So kind of defying the mechanisms that are in this deal. That seems, pretty unlikely as well. The pressure, this is, I think, apart from the unprecedented hyperbole, one of the greatest days in the history of civilization. Okay, so talk big, that's okay. We've got laudable, elevated goals here. But the fact is that 8 Arab and Muslim nations have signed up. The terminology is interesting and worth looking at very carefully, but broadly speaking, 8 Arab and Muslim countries have signed up to try and bring this effort to a success, with caveats and concerns of their own. Is Qatar and Turkey pressure sufficient to defy the logic that I've set out already against Hamas agreeing to this? Is there also all kinds of stuff behind the scenes? We've heard talk about non-papers and other. I don't know. I have no evidence of that there's some kind of other agreement. We heard President Trump saying, basically, no, Hamas is not on board with this yet. He didn't say that. He said he put it the other way. I've got reason to think. I've heard that Hamas is inclined or would accept this too. And basically, he said of some of the other partners to this initiative that they have been in touch with Hamas. He said that he has not. Again, there's been talk about direct and indirect. Well, he was saying he hasn't, at the very least, had direct contact with Hamas, but others have, and we know that Turkish officials are in Qatar. That's unprecedented, as far as I know. Certainly, in terms of engagement in the negotiation. So, is there pressure? Do they have an argument to make to Hamas that says, you have to look at the well-being of the Palestinian people? Are these arguments which we would dismiss as soon as we make them, because we don't think that Hamas thinks like that. And we've heard in the last day or two Hamas officials saying we retain the right to arms. These are not even our arms. These are the Palestinian people's arms, and they have every right to use them to resist the occupation, by which they mean the presence of Israel. Let's not be unclear about that. So on the face of it, every reason for Hamas to reject it, no compelling reasons for Hamas to accept it, except that the leader of the free world and an unprecedented alliance appear to have some confidence that this has legs. We'll see.
When you say the presence of Israel, you mean the existence of Israel?
That's what I mean, Amanda. We're not talking about Israel's presence in Gaza, because until October the 7th, there was no Israeli presence in Gaza. We're not even talking about the disputed West Bank. We're talking about the fact of Israel. That is what Hamas believes, argues that it has the legitimate right to oppose by all and any means, as in violence and murder, as we have seen.
Okay, so let's actually take a step back and think about the disputed West Bank and Hamas's role there. And as I've mentioned many times over the podcast, especially with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian, who was just on, the army is in the West Bank heavily in order to prevent terrorist outbreaks such as what we saw on October 7th. But it's not as if Hamas isn't there, meaning Hamas is there. And so I look at this peace plan, and if I were Hamas, which thank God I am not, I would think maybe it's time for me to cut my losses in Gaza and put my focus on the West Bank, where I also have a presence and where there may be more success in creating terrible terrorist attacks, because the population is so entwined and so mixed between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims. And if I were Hamas, I would say, okay, let's shift gears. Let's for the moment say Gaza is off the table for us right now. Let's shift our focus. Do you think there's anything like that in their minds?
I think it's a very interesting point. I wouldn't dismiss it at all. There is indeed a strong Hamas presence in the West Bank. Hamas's goal is to take over all leadership of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. Mahmoud Abbas, I think, went to hospital yesterday. I think it was routine for some tests, as far as we know. But the Palestinian Authority is relatively weak. It doesn't overcome the compelling reasons for it not to say yes to this in Gaza, but it might be part of their considerations. And again, you have these very, very problematic intermediaries. You have the United States, which is the least problematic as far as Israel is concerned. You have Egypt, which has a track record and a relationship with Israel that, certainly not without friction, but one would have somewhat more confidence in what is going on if Egypt and the United States were the only mediators. And you have Qatar, which is fueling hostility to the West, I would say, and certainly anti-Israel incitement as a strategic goal via Al Jazeera. Well, they're mediating. Turkey is now mediating. Turkey, which is an overt supporter of Hamas, which misrepresents what has been happening for the last 2 years, which can turn, which can pivot. I'm not saying that can't happen, but you have the intermediary, some of the intermediaries at least, ostensibly interested in bringing this war to an end in Gaza, and via a formula set up by the president that is intended to achieve the demise of Hamas. Well, some of these mediators, it is hard to believe that they are genuinely pushing for the demise of Hamas. And therefore, points like that about Hamas's ongoing capabilities in the West Bank. The Hamas figure who was directly responsible for orchestrating terrorism from the West Bank, Salah al-Aruri, was in Turkey for a long time. He's no longer with us. So Turkey is complicit, not merely potentially supportive, complicit in enabling Hamas terrorism in the West Bank and from the West Bank.
And of course, we can't forget that the PLO at least had a stronghold in Lebanon and other countries in the region for, decades. And Hamas already has a presence in Lebanon. We've seen rockets coming from Lebanon claimed by Hamas over the war. So there's a lot of different options on the table for Hamas to regroup and become, the force that it was ahead of October 7th, at least.
Yeah, I think so. And I think these are good points that you're making. I really do. At the same time, and I think the arguments that speak to concern and wriggling and strategic goals and so on, these are powerful arguments. We haven't even mentioned, by the way, what may be going on between what is described as, Hamas in exile and Hamas in Gaza, the ostensible reviving influence on these talks of Hamas in Gaza, that it's reorganizing to some extent. There may be conflicting thoughts within Hamas, which is much reduced, of course, and so on. This is a very complicated reality. I think all of the instinctive and sensible interpretations would be pessimistic, and nonetheless, really for the first time, certainly in the most concerted way, you have an effort led by somebody who, in Trump, recognizes the power of his office. I don't know how far we should go back for that very naked understanding of his leverage, right? The president of the United States, an incredibly powerful figure for all kinds of reasons. There are players who will interact with a powerhouse president because of where they see their self-interests. There are all kinds of considerations going on here. And what you have now is a president trying to wield that influence in the most... He's not particularly interested in the specific details, the 20 points, this comma, that clause, and so on. That's not to say that those details can't doom an effort, but he's working in a big picture. The grandiose statements which just appear absurd to cynics and experienced observers and people who are living with this. Now that's how he is trying to operate. So again, with every single caveat and every expectation based on common sense, this is not going to work. And nonetheless, you have the most powerful player saying, well, I'm trying to make this work, and it is going to work, or I have reason to believe it's going to work. And by the way, if it doesn't, it will be Hamas's fault. And then, Bibi, as he said, you'll have my back to go and finish the job. I don't even know what that involves, because Israel has been trying to finish the job for 2 years. But it's a new parameter. It's a new framework that has been set here by a president operating with the power of the presidency.
David, we have so much more to discuss on this, and the details are still so unclear. So I'm going to hit pause on our conversation now. Wish you a Gmar Chatima Tova. Yom Kippur is on the horizon along with the flotilla. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amanda. I just think, on a day like this, at this solemn time, let's just allow ourselves just a modicum of hope. Please God, may the forces that are life-affirming, may they bring this effort to fruition. Logic dictates that it's going to fail at this time of year more than ever. Let's have a little hope for the sanctity of life.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining me today, David.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. This episode was produced by Adina Karpuch. Until next time, Shalom.